Welcome to the My Jesus Story podcast. I'm Kim, and today we have Rob.
Hi there.
Welcome. I'm glad you were willing to join us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So typically we start with, where did you meet Jesus, or when did you find out about having a relationship with Jesus?
I met Jesus at Northgate Baptist Church in Tampa, Florida, when I was 29 years old. I guess you would say one of my best going out drinking buddies married the pastor's daughter. And he invited me to the wedding, and we went, brought my date, we went to the wedding. And after, they had a reception in the fellowship hall. I had never even heard of a fellowship hall at that point, but I learned what it is now. But I remember that it was raining, and the pastor was soft-spoken, and he was trying to get everybody in this fellowship hall, and there were a lot of people there. And everybody was talking, and it was raining outside, big thunderstorm in Florida. And he was trying to get everybody's attention, and he kept standing in the middle of the room going, excuse me. And I've got a pretty loud voice, and my voice projects. So I was just about to make a really loud noise to get everybody to quiet down when a huge thunder boom hit, and the lights went off. And then the lights came back on, and everybody in the room was silent, and they were all looking at the pastor. And I remember commenting to my date, that man's got friends in high places.
Yeah.
Because he was definitely not going to get their attention with the excuse me kind of conversation.
Yeah.
But that was as a something other than a small child. That was the first time I had ever gone to a church, and it was for his wedding. And then they went on their honeymoon, and probably a couple of months later, he invited me to church. I always think it's funny that one of my best drinking buddies is the reason I know Jesus, because he's the one that invited me to church. And I was dating the same girl, and I talked to her. She goes, yeah, I'll go to church. So we showed up, and I'm typically a punctual person. So I was on time. My friend and his new wife were not. So we sat there looking around this new experience. And the whole time I'm thinking, I am going to kill that guy. It was very awkward. It's less awkward if you know somebody and you're hanging out, but it was very awkward to be there. But I listened to the message. And
did he not show up?
He did. They showed up about 5 or 10 minutes late, and they sat in the very back of the church. And I sat, the church it wasn't like a 3-section church. It was a 2-section, had a center aisle. And I sat 3 or 4 rows back on the right-hand side. And I stayed there for a long time, 3 or 4 rows back on the right-hand side. And they snuck in the back door. And it's not a fan type sanctuary at that church. It's kind of a long church. And it was a pretty good piece to back where they sat. And I didn't see them until I made my way to the parking lot. And then he came running up. He goes, oh man, I'm really sorry. We were late. We snuck in the back. And I'm like, how can you be late? That's her dad.
Oh, you're right.
The pastor's her dad.
You're right. I forgot that.
But they were late. And so that was my first experience. And it's interesting because he didn't invite me again. But after that, I was thinking about it. I was thinking about, that was kind of neat. And I thought to myself, I wonder if he'll invite me again. And he didn't. And I remember commenting to the girl I was dating. I said, I was thinking about that. I was thinking about going to church. And she says, really? I said, yeah. And she says, where? And I said, that one that we went to. She goes, where your buddy ditched us? And I said, yeah, that's the one. She says, okay. So she and I both went for a little while. But I sat in that same seat for almost a year. And about 8 months in, I didn't know who this person was at the time. Now they're a lifelong friend, but the youth minister's wife, in this particular church, a youth minister wasn't a 20-something that played guitar. He was an older person, but she came up to me after the service one day. I had gone by myself that day, and she said, she goes, excuse me. And she introduced herself to me, and she says, I wanted to say that I'm so glad that you've been attending our church. And I just wanted you to know that I was praying for you. Now at that time, I didn't realize how amazing that was or how special that was, but it was. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, crazy lady.
I was wondering that.
How do I get away from you?
Yes. Like, did it creep you out?
It was awkward because I didn't know how to respond to that.
Yeah.
And I think I said something like, okay, thank you.
Right.
And I tried to exit stage left as quickly as possible, which I did. And she was just the nicest person. And I remember probably just before and definitely after that time, it's a Baptist church. We give an invitation at the end of every service, and they would do the invitation. And every time, from pretty much right around that same time moving forward, the pastor would give an invitation, and he always talked about saved and everything. And I kept thinking, man, I sure would like to have whatever that saved thing is. Because the people that I interacted with, and when I show up, and that lady was so nice, and she didn't know me from anybody, but she was so engaging, and she was so kind, and the look on her face was just, it was peaceful. And I thought, man, that's just amazing. But I knew me, very intimate knowledge of me and all the things that I had done in 29 years. And I thought, I am not worthy. I am not worthy of this whole saved thing. Wow. So for months after that, I would sit there, they would give the invitation, and I would white knuckle the pew in front of me, just holding on, because I wanted to step out. I wanted to walk the aisle and get quote unquote saved. But I didn't know, I didn't understand what it was all about. And I knew my past and some of the crazy things that I had done. And I said, I would look at the people, and I was like, I am not worthy. I am not like these other people. I'd like to be, but I'm not. And I will never forget. I don't remember the whole message that the pastor preached that day, but he preached a message, and I think the message, the tenor of the message was righteousness. And at the very end, he quoted from the book of Isaiah. I'm bad with addresses, so I looked it up before. Isaiah 64:6, and it talks about our most righteous acts are but filthy rags at the feet of the Father. Wow. And it was in that moment that I remember thinking, so the very best that any human being can do is pretty much rubbish to God and compared to his righteousness. And I looked around the room, and I thought, so none of these people are in any better shape than I am. And that was the icebreaker for me. And they play a drawing song, and it was probably Just As I Am or something like that. But I remember they started playing the song, and I said, I'm going. And I started to step out, and there was somebody walking past me, so I stepped back in. And then I waited, and I started to step out again, but then there was somebody walking past me again, so I waited. And again, I wish that I knew exactly what he preached, because it must have been an amazing message. Because somewhere around 13 or 14 people received Jesus that day.
Wow.
In that church. And it wasn't a huge church. At that time, I think the church was running like 125, 150 people on Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't a small church, but it wasn't like thousands of members.
Yeah.
And I was last. And I will never forget the look. The pastor, he knew who I was, because he had seen me, coming in, and I sat close. So that was helpful. And I was friends with his daughter's new husband.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure he knew my first name. But man, he was praying with a child, probably 7 or 8 years old. And when he looked up from praying with that child, the only way I can describe the look on his face was, it was like he was proud of me. Mm. And he had no reason to be proud of me. We weren't related or anything like that. But it was almost, he looked at me like he was proud of me. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange. And when I'm nervous, I make jokes. Mm-hmm. And so I walked up and I said, do you have time for one more? And he says, brother, I will stand here all day. He goes, I absolutely have time for one more.
Awesome.
And he walked me through pretty much the plan of salvation. And he asked me if I believed that I was a sinner. And I said, yeah, boy, howdy. And we went through that whole, the whole process. And I can remember it like yesterday. I felt like I just lost 100 pounds. It was, weight came off of my shoulders.
Wow.
And it's kind of, I'm sure it's similar in many churches, but when somebody makes a profession of faith, typically they'll stand with the pastor at the door and greet people as they go out. Well, there were so many people that were saved that day in this church, there wasn't room where people exited the building for all the people. So they had everybody line up across the front of the sanctuary. Yeah. And I remember it had to have been at least 125 people came by, shaking our hands and telling us, what a great decision we had made and stuff like that. And again, I was nervous. So I joked with the people standing next to me. I said, I feel like I'm running for public office.
Right. Right.
Hi, can I have your vote? Kind of a silly thing. But it was an amazing day. And I have never, ever, ever regretted that decision, ever.
Right. Well, when you get that kind of an unloading of pressure off your shoulders, I would imagine that you look for that interaction from then on, right?
I didn't even know I was burdened.
Yeah.
And that was the whole thing. I didn't even know that I was burdened. I thought I was happy. If people that knew me, I was kind of like the jokester, the life of the party kind of guy. And I had no idea I was burdened. I had no idea I carried what I had carried. And I turned that over at that moment and I gave it all.
So that begs the question, like happiness versus joy. Mm-hmm. Did you feel a difference, like worldly happiness versus joy with God?
I don't know. At that time, I don't know if I could have described the difference to you. I know what you're talking about now. So I would say I felt relieved. Huh. I felt free. Uh-huh. Is the best way to describe it. Yeah. It just felt like I had been pent up for a long time, and then all of a sudden it was, I'm free.
Wow.
Wow. And I mean, nothing was different other than, nothing externally was different. Yeah. Everything on the inside was different.
Yeah.
And it was my transformation, I used to speak very colorfully. That's a euphemism
Gotcha.
for the fact that I had a potty mouth.
Yeah.
And I would invent curse words. And it was just over time, that went away. I didn't think that way anymore. I can remember, it was probably maybe 6 months-ish after I got saved. I like movies and I like to quote movies,
Yes.
but
Yep.
it was about 6 months after I got saved, and somebody we were talking about a particular movie, and there was a quote in the movie that used profanity, and I quoted it, and when I did, the profanity felt weird coming out of my mouth. It felt foreign, like somebody else was speaking, not me. So yeah, it was different. It has been different ever since.
That's what I was wondering. Well, let's go back to, if we can back up a minute. Gosh, so many questions. Had you been to church as a child?
I went, my mother went to Catholic school.
Okay.
I say my mother, my adopted mother. I was given up for adoption at birth. And my adopted mother and father were both from the Cincinnati area.
Okay.
I was born in Huntington, West Virginia, which is not far across the border, obviously. And my mother was raised Catholic. To the best of my knowledge, at that time, my father didn't have any faith statement. So growing up, we never went to church or anything like that. I did go to an Easter Mass with my mother's aunt once. And it was different. It was interesting, but it was kind of odd. And then at one point as a child, my mom and dad became friends with a children's church minister and his wife in the little town that we lived in. And they would stop by and pick myself and my sister up and carry us to church on Sundays. Pretty sure my mom and dad just was like, kids are out of the house, day off kind of thing. But, and I went there a little bit, but I was really young then. So I didn't really understand a whole lot.
Right.
And it was children's church, the felt board with the little people that they put up
I
there.
forgot about the felt board and the people.
Right. I'm old.
I did. Yeah, I am too. And I forgot about them. Oh, that brings back happy memories.
So, I still have this. I have one of those cheapy gift, King James Bibles.
Yeah.
With my name on it.
Yeah.
I still have it. And I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and it was a contest. Who could recite the books of the Bible in order, the first half.
Okay.
And I worked on that for a long time. And my mom helped me, and I worked on it. I worked on it. I worked on it. I was probably in like the 3rd or 4th grade. And they said, okay, who knows their Bible books on a Sunday morning? And I'm like, I got this. And well, I had that when I was sitting in my seat.
Yeah.
But they had me walk in front of the whole children's church area. And then I was pretty nervous about that. But I did get through it.
Oh, good.
And I won the Bible, and there were a few kids that did. And then it was a few weeks later, they put our names on them and everything, and they gave them to us in what I termed as big church. At the time, they gave them to us in big church.
Right.
And the pastor of the church, not the children's church, but the actual pastor, he gave them to us, and it was a big deal.
Yeah.
But I guess it was a big enough deal to me. I still have the Bible.
Right.
And then it's going to sound funny, but I have to explain the relationship. My mother was married before she met my father.
Mm-hmm.
Not a great relationship, but they did have a daughter, which is obviously my sister now. I have two sisters, one who was my mother's biologically, and I have another sister who was adopted when she was a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to keep it straight. My mother's ex-husband's mother lived in Florida, not far from where we did. And I knew her as Grandma B. Her last name started with a B. So I knew her as Grandma B. And she loved my dad. I had no idea that she was my mother's ex-husband's mom. But she loved my dad and my mom and me by extension. And she was Pentecostal Church of God.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go and stay with her sometimes. And she would take me to church with her. And I went to church the first couple of times, and they kept sending me to children's church, and I didn't like it because I kept saying, I don't learn anything. It's dumb.
It's like, how old are you with this?
5th grade, maybe.
Okay.
And I remember pleading with my grandma one Sunday morning. She goes, okay, you can stay in church with me, but you better be quiet and don't be disruptive. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, no problem. So I sat in the regular service, and she was shocked is the word I would use, because after that we went out to get lunch or something, and I was talking to her about the sermon. Mm-hmm. And she says, you understood that? And I said, yeah, I mean, he was speaking the words I understand. So yeah. And I was talking to her about the scripture and everything, and she was pretty amazed. And at that point she says, okay, you can, next time you go, you can stay in what we call big mm-hmm. church. You can stay in big church. So I like that pretty good. And I went to a tent revival with her one time where I got introduced to speaking in tongues for the first mm-hmm. time, which was interesting.
Mm-hmm. Especially for a young person.
It was, I remember I was sitting there with my grandma's here, and my grandma was to my right, I'm here, and there was a man to my left. And I remember it being hot. It's in the summer in Florida, in a tent, no air conditioning, in a wooden folding chair. And the pastor was preaching up a storm, and all of a sudden the guy next to me, he shot up out of his chair like he was lit on fire. And he began to stuff was coming out of his mouth, and none of it was words that I understood. And I remember when that happened, the hair on my arms was standing straight up on end. But when he was finished, he pretty much melted into the seat next to me. He was dripping wet from his head down to his toes, just wrung out, and he was exhausted. Mm. So it didn't feel like faked in any way to me.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand this at the time, but now going through the scriptures, I understand it. But there was a woman on the other side of this tent, and right after he collapsed in the chair, she shot up out of her chair, and she started speaking in English.
Oh.
So, he spoke in tongues, and mm-hmm. she was the interpreter.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's weird.
Yeah.
It was different. And my grandma explained it to me, and she showed me the scripture. But that was my only exposure up until I was 28 mm-hmm. when I was first exposed to actual church as an adult.
Right.
In something I could truly understand everything that was going on.
Yep. So you went to church, you kind of understood how it went.
Basic gist.
Went a different route for a little while, decided to come back. Not decided to come back, but something kind of was pulling you back.
I didn't really decide to come back. And that was the thing. I didn't sit there and go, I'm going to start going to church now. Mm-hmm. It was an invitation that led to, what I know now is God's grace extending to me even before I had any idea what was
Right.
going on. So I understand it today, but back then I was like, I don't know. I felt pulled. I felt drawn to church.
In that, it's an interesting thing that I know for myself, I'm a little leery to invite somebody to church, right?
Mm-hmm.
But an invitation, not just one, but a second one, like, hey, come back next week.
Mm-hmm.
My thought would be, well, they're here. They know they're welcome.
Mm-hmm.
But the importance of saying, hey, you want to come back next week?
Yeah. And that she was praying for me. That was a big deal. And now that I know her and we have a relationship, if I use the term prayer warrior, she would fit.
Okay.
She is a prayer warrior. She's an amazing woman of Christ. And her husband is too, but they're just an amazing family, period. And it was, God used her to get my attention a little further. And then he used Isaiah's words from years before Jesus was even in existence on earth, to pull down that last wall, the last barrier that told Rob, you're not good enough. And when I learned that the most righteous thing that I or anybody else could do was filthy rags, I said, I got to go.
Right.
This saved thing is for me, and I want it. So I was ready to grab it, wrestle it to the ground, and hold on to it for all it was worth.
Did any of the stuff that you had learned, or when you were a little kid, did any of that bubble back up? Like, oh, I remember this, or that's not even the question I want to ask. The question I want to ask is more like, was there a connection from what you learned as a little kid? Because it seemed like you understood a higher intellect than what your age would have allowed,
I don't know about that. The only thing I can say is that, again, my mother was raised Catholic. She went to Catholic school, confirmation, catechism, the whole 9 yards. And the thing that I knew is that Easter wasn't all about a bunny rabbit, and Christmas wasn't all about Santa Claus.
Gotcha.
But that was pretty much the extent of my biblical training, and just the little random, every once in a while with my grandma in Newport Richey, or with my aunt who came down from Ohio visiting, and she was Catholic and took me to the Catholic church, and it was pretty. It was a lot of pomp and circumstance. I didn't understand any of that though. It was way over my head as probably a third or fourth grader. I'm like, this is weird.
Right. Yeah. So after you go up front, you get saved, and then there are like bumps in the road, and like you were talking about, you had colorful language, and then at some point it just turned your stomach a little bit. What did those first few weeks or months look like afterward?
Well, not a whole lot changed in my life right away. I went forward, and in fact, and this is true, I went to a party the Saturday before I was going to be baptized on a Sunday. And there were adult beverages there. I mean, it was a pool party in Florida, all that it implies. And I remember just kind of laughing and joking around with some of the people there. And I said, and I'm getting baptized tomorrow. And the people that were hosting the party, evidently they were believers, but they were also partying believers. And they said, they were like, oh, that's a big deal. And I guess at that point, I didn't realize what a big deal it was. I was still enjoying, I'm free. I didn't know what I was freed from, really.
Right.
I just knew that I felt free. I felt like I was different. And they kind of sobered me a little bit in that moment, because I thought, did I say something wrong? Because it was and all of a sudden real serious. So that was kind of awkward. But then after that, looking in retrospect, I can see God was putting people in my life that I could relate to when I needed the person to relate to. And then he would grow me to a certain point, and then would come somebody else. And then he would grow me to that point, and then somebody else.
Yes.
And it was a trail guide.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was on this trail, and I got my first trail guide. My first trail guide was he was a Sunday school teacher. He liked NASCAR.
Mm-hmm.
And he and I were interested in some of the same things. So we kind of hit it off in that regard. And I learned stuff from him, and he took me to a certain point. And there was a couple in that church, that the husband is Persian. He's from Iran, and he grew up Muslim. He made a profession of faith, accepted Christ. So he is this on fire individual. His wife was equally on fire. She was on fire first, but I don't want to give their story. But I kept looking at him, because this guy, you could see Jesus dripping all over this guy. No matter where he went, no matter what he did, you could just see it. He loved people with passion, and he had a passion for what he called his people, Persian or Middle Eastern people. I remember I went to lunch with him once, and he, excuse me, it was a cafeteria style place, and we were in line and we're talking and everything, and he happened to see two people of Middle Eastern Persian descent that were close to us in line. And we go through, and we get our food, and he says to me, he goes, "I'm so sorry to ask this." He says, "Do you see those two gentlemen right there?" He says, "They're my people. And I want to see if I can talk to them about Jesus. Would you mind if I sit with them for a few minutes?" And at first I was like, "No." And on the inside I was thinking, how rude. But I said no on the outside, and he thanked me, and he got over, and he went over, and he started chatting with those guys, and they were chatting in what I know now as Farsi, which is a Persian language.
Okay.
He talked with those guys for probably 15, 20 minutes, just sharing Jesus with them in a language that I didn't understand, but they sure did. And I was awkwardly sitting there talking to his wife. And then he comes back over, and he's overly apologetic, and he said, "I'm so sorry." He says, "But those are my people, and I had to share Jesus with them." The burden on his heart. And I thought, man, I love that guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That he would do that. And I had seen him do that many times. We went to the beach one time, and he was talking to a guy that he was talking to him about Jesus. He says, well, first "Hey, I'm from Iran." And the guy was like, "Oh yeah, me too." And they hit it off and everything. And they, "How long have you been in the States?" and stuff like that. And he told him, and he says, "Do you want to know the greatest thing I found in the United States?" And the guy says, "Sure, what?" And he says, "Jesus." And the other guy, he was like, "Oh yeah," kind of thing.
Hold on a minute.
And the guy says, he says, we're Muslim. And he says, and he goes, "Oh," he goes, "Muslim, yes." He says, "Very good religion, but know this: Jesus is king."
Oh.
And it impressed me. It impressed me that he didn't care. He didn't care if somebody yelled at him, or he didn't care if anybody was decided to get mean with him or anything. And I said, I want to spend as much time as I can with this guy.
Yeah.
And I did. And again, that's God taking me to another place
Yeah.
and to another level.
Yeah.
And then the lady who told me she was praying for me,
Mm-hmm.
she had two kids, a boy and a girl. The boy was older than the girl, and they were both in the youth group, and her husband was the youth minister.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked me if I would come back. He says, we're having a youth event. And he asked me if I'd come back and help him out. Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I did. And I began to have a relationship with his kids and everything. It's funny how God works, because that lady and her prayers helped bring me to Jesus. And I actually got to mentor her children.
Oh, wow.
Later on.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was an interesting, the way God works in circles.
Yes. It's so cool that your mind documented, or it acknowledges, because I hadn't thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
Like that you meet people and they bring you to a certain point.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden somebody comes in and doesn't challenge, but makes you think about why you think what you think.
Right.
And
moves me forward.
Yes. Yeah.
The young man got involved in what was called, I don't know what it's called now, but it was called BCM back then, which is it was Baptist Collegiate Ministries. Mm-hmm. When he went to the university, and we were kind of, I was a lot older than he was, but we were kind of friends. Mm-hmm. But I had this kind of mentor status with him. Mm-hmm. He knew more Bible than I did, but I knew more life than he did. So he would ask life questions and things like that. And we would talk about that and kind of bring him along in that way. And he kind of taught me some Bible that I didn't know. So it was a little bit of a symbiotic relationship with him. But I remember we were going to go out, we were going to do a beach service at night with the BCM. Mm-hmm. And they had a guy there that was going to play guitar and stuff like that. And the way they said it, they said, let's just go out and invite people to join us for worship. Mm-hmm. And that was my opportunity to be like the Persian man's name. His name is Pedram, mm-hmm. which is the Persian, which is the same as Peter in English, which would have been Cephas in Hebrew.
Okay.
So Peter the Rock, Cephas, same name. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
But I said, this is my moment. I'm going to be just like Pedram. Mm-hmm. And I walked up to a guy who was trying to kiss on his girl, and I'm sure they were liquored up. And I went over and I started talking to him about coming over to our worship service. And the guy was looking at me like, get away from me. But the girl was like, hey, that sounds like fun. And he looks at her and then he looks back at me, and he was shooting daggers at me. He's like, you're messing with me, man. Yeah. But I had to talk to him. And we went up and down the beach, and this young man was with me. And he says, afterwards, we had actually gotten several people to come and join the little worship service. They kind of stood up at a little bit of a distance, but they were there and they were listening. And he said afterwards, he goes, Rob, I feel strong in the Lord when I'm with you. And I thought, well, that's a heck of a compliment. Mm-hmm. But I don't even know what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. Right now, I'm mimicking what I see and trying to up my game to what I see, because I could see God working through that guy, and I could see Jesus in him, and I wanted the same thing for me. Mm-hmm. I remember the youth group was talking about life verses one time. There was a graduation from high school, and they were talking about life verses. And I thought, it's a life verse. And I talked to the youth pastor, and I said, what's a life verse? And he says, well, a life verse is just something that, sticks out to you, mm-hmm. something that God really draws your attention to. And I thought, I don't have a life verse. So that made me go read scripture. I needed to read more scripture, not just what the preacher was preaching about on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
I had to read scripture. So the preacher preached on something out of the book of Ephesians. So I started reading Ephesians. And I got to Ephesians 6, and I read through the armor of God, and I thought, oh, that was really cool. And then it got, every preacher that preaches Ephesians 6, they stop at 18. Ephesians 6:18,
Mm-hmm.
or sometimes some stop at 17, but 19 was my life verse. And in NIV, it says, and pray also for me that whenever I open my mouth, words may be given me that I will fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel. And I didn't understand why God would give me that particular verse as a life verse, but a couple of years later, it was fully obvious to me. Our pastor had gone to be a director of missions in California,
Mm-hmm.
and we had an interim minister who was a member of the church. He was already an associate pastor at the church, and I don't remember what he preached about that day either, but I felt the call of God on my heart that said, you are going to serve me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea what that meant. And so I went forward at invitation time, and I shared that with the minister. And he says, you answered the call. That's the big thing. He said, God will make it clear what you're supposed to do. And I prayed on that for a good while. God has blessed me with a little bit of talent to sing, and I sang with the worship team and at the church. And I would talk to friends, God's called me to ministry, but I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
But the youth pastor kept having me substitute for him when he was off going on vacation or just couldn't be there. So I was subbing for the youth minister. But I also had the ability to sing. In fact, I sang with a gospel quartet for about 5.5 years.
Oh, cool.
So I would talk to people, and they would say, oh, I think you're called to music ministry. And I thought, maybe. Just because you can sing doesn't mean you're supposed to go into music ministry. It's just because you can, maybe you're an eloquent speaker doesn't necessarily mean you should be a pastor. But I kept praying about it. And we had called a new pastor, and I had shared with him what was going on. Mm-hmm. To see like which column, where I had been useful to God in youth ministry, and I've been useful to God in music ministry. And he had me write out this list. And the interesting part about it is the list were exactly the same length. So I brought it to him, I showed it to him, and he just glanced at it. I don't know why he even had me write it down. Maybe it's just to get my head in the right place. And he asked me a question. He says, okay, which one of them would you do for free? And I said, both of them. So I kind of messed up his theory for a second there. But as much as I love music, and I loved singing with the quartet, and I really did, I really felt God was drawing me towards the teenagers more. And once that made sense to me, the youth pastor had felt at the church I was serving in, he felt that he was getting too old to continue to minister to youth. And he was planning to retire from being a youth minister. And the church had asked me if I was interested in that. I said, I am. But at the same time, the pastor that baptized me had come back from California, was serving a pastoring a different church, and they were in need of a youth pastor. And he asked me about it, and I said, well, let me pray about it. Mm-hmm. So I had two places. Mm-hmm. One was familiar. I knew all the kids. I was already established in the church. I didn't have to go anywhere different. Everything would have been just right. The other one was completely new. It would involve me having to move from one home to a different place. And as much as I prayed that God would put me at the church that I was already attending, I said, God, tell me what to do. And I heard, go. You mean go back to the same church that I was at?
So what I'm hearing is, yeah.
And God says, go.
Yeah.
And I said, okay. So I let the church know that I was serving, that God was really pushing me in the direction of, the other ministry. Mm-hmm. And they were like, well, we totally understand. We're sorry, but we understand. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I had not had an interview at the other place. And it was funny because if in secular terms, I turned down one job before I even had an offer from another job. But I didn't care about that part anyway. Mm-hmm. But I met with the pastor, and he kind of explained what was going on, and then I met with their search committee and the whole nine, and then I met the church, and the church asked questions, and they decided to call me as their youth minister. So I did student ministry all total about 14 years.
Wow.
Youth ministry. And we were serving in North Carolina. I was the youth pastor and the worship pastor. Mm-hmm. They kind of combined two jobs together to give me a livable salary so I could serve full time.
Yeah.
And that was awesome for a while. And then the senior pastor got in trouble with the deacons in the church, and they decided that they were gonna ask him to resign. Mm-hmm. And he did. And then since he brought me from Florida to North Carolina, and I was associated with him because he and I had a previous relationship, mm-hmm. I thought, well, man, we're in trouble. And then they decided to do some reorganization, and they said, well, we'd love for you to stay, but we're going to take your two jobs that they put together with this salary, and we're going to separate them as the two jobs. And, oh, by the way, the salary is going to be about half.
Oh, wow.
So you're welcome to stay and do two jobs, but you're going to have to get another job to go along with it. And I decided that wasn't where God wanted us to go.
Yeah.
And I talked to our director of missions, and he said, I'll be honest with you, Rob. He says, I don't see you as just a youth minister. He says, I think you're a pastor. Have you ever considered pastoring a church? And I said, no, I really hadn't.
Right.
But after they had let the pastor go, for the next month or so, I was the only minister they had on staff. Wow. So I did all of it. That I did visitation. We had a ministry where we did a chapel service at a nursing home once a week, preached on Sunday mornings, led youth on Wednesdays and Sunday nights, led the worship team before preaching on Sunday mornings.
Wow.
I did a lot.
Yeah.
And he said, have you ever considered, stepping into a pastorate? And I said, I really hadn't. And I talked to my wife about it, and we discussed it, and we thought, well, if that's what God's moving us. And she kind of felt the same way, mm-hmm. that she felt that I, probably should be pastoring a church. And there was one of the guys with the association was pastoring a church on an interim level in another, just like 2 towns over. And he asked me for a resume, and I gave it to him. And they asked if I had a any recordings of me preaching? And I said, no, I don't have any of that. So they asked if there was a place I could, preach a message where they could come and hear me. And the director of missions got me a place where I could go and preach a message for them. And I did. And evidently they liked what they heard because they called us back for an interview. Search committee wanted us to come to the church. We preached at the church. The church called us. It was almost unanimous. I think 2 people voted against calling us as the pastor of that church. I pastored that church for about 3 years. And then I have a sister up here that had survived non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Wow.
And I was a little concerned that my family up here kept getting older and were passing. And I wanted the opportunity to be able to preach the gospel to my sister. And God gave me that opportunity. My niece brought her to church all the way from Colerain Township out to Hamersville. And I got to preach the gospel to my sister.
Wow.
And I would move my family all over again just for that opportunity. Because I know right now my sister has heard the gospel.
Right.
What she does with it from there is entirely her business, but I know she knows.
Right.
And so it's kind of how we ended up here.
Okay.
Because we began to pray and ask, God, if this, should we do this? Should we?
Right.
And I kind of felt one day I was driving around and I felt that we should. And I came home and I said, hey, I want to talk to you about something. And Jen says, yeah, I want to talk to you about something too. And I said, really, what's that? She goes, I think you should send a resume to Ohio. And I said, that's what I wanted to talk to you about because I think I should send a resume to Ohio. And we sent the resume up and then we came up here and did ministry up here for 6 years.
Wow.
So
isn't that funny when your 2 thought processes come together? That's when I feel like, especially for Steve and I, because we think so oppositely a lot. When we're thinking the same thing, it must be God working in us because it just doesn't happen.
That's us.
Yeah.
That's us. We're very much opposites in many things. But when we're alike and when we're on the same page, we're inseparable at that point.
Yep. Well, I think that I could sit and talk to you for quite a while because there's parts of your story that I still want to dig into, but
sure.
For now, we're going to cut it and I'm going to ask you the last question.
Okay.
And then maybe you'll come back in the future and we'll pick up from because I want to dig back into what it was like for you, and don't start talking because I know we'll be here for a lot longer. What it was like for you when you were trying to make the change, all the sticky things and all the yucky things, the growth.
Sure.
Because growth is uncomfortable, right?
Sure.
So I guess, you know what, since I brought it up, let's just go.
Okay.
Can you think of what for someone who is in that scenario right now, is there a thought that comes into your mind, like the stickiest or ugliest part of that phase that was most uncomfortable for you, that would provide a little bit of like encouragement or inspiration for someone in that process now?
Yeah. For me, it was friends growing apart from friends.
Oh yeah.
My friends didn't change. God changed me. And I didn't have a falling out. We didn't argue. We didn't fight. We just grew in different directions. They stayed the same. They did the same things I did. My interest for that was non-existent. My interest was elsewhere, and God was moving me elsewhere. So the most painful thing for me going through the process of being a Christian and learning what that was like and latching on to other, taking relationships to the next level and the next level and next level. the thing that was the hardest for me was losing friends.
Yeah. Was there a loneliness that came along with
Absolutely.
that? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a really good friend that we watched football games together all the time. And when we couldn't sit together and watch football games, we would call each other. Did you see that play? Did you see that catch?
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. And then I remember sitting watching a game and I called him and I was like, hey man, did you see that? And he was like, oh yeah, I saw it.
Hmm.
It was quiet. I thought, are we, something wrong? And I was like, all right, call me on the next play. And he never called me. And I saw him probably not too awful long after that. And I said, hey, are you mad at me? And he goes, no. And I said, well, I was doing the football thing. And he says, we just kind of, I don't know, you're different. And I just,
Mm-hmm.
I like the old guy. And I said, well, I'm the same guy. And he says, not really.
Mm.
You look like the same guy. You sound like the same guy, but you're not really the same guy. And he says, we're still friends and everything. He says, it's just different. And I understood that because where I went was different. How I spoke was different.
Mm-hmm.
What God was doing with me was different. But he didn't change. He was exactly the same. He was the same guy that I liked. He was the same guy that I liked to hang out with. So growing apart was hard.
Yeah.
And it was painful to that. And I think for anybody that is going through that, I would say, hold on, and just keep going, because sometimes God prunes. And anybody that's ever grown anything and knows about pruning knows that you prune for greater growth.
Right. Right.
And it's possible that relationship would have held me in a different place.
Right. Right. That's perfect. That's excellent advice.
Yeah.
Good. All right. I'm glad we dug into that a little bit.
Okay.
So, not that I don't want to have you back in the future because I do still have more questions, but
sure.
For now, the last question we always ask is, you're sitting on a bench with God. You look at him and say,
why? Why? Why would you take an orphaned kid at birth? Put people in his life that was willing to be his family for no reason. I had the greatest dad in the world, in my opinion. My mom was pretty awesome too. But somebody, and my birth mother, I don't have any animosity. I know some people do with a birth mom, but I don't. I think she was amazing because she chose life when she could have chose something else.
yeah.
But there was another lady and another man who chose to be mom and dad, and they didn't have to. So she gave me life. They gave me a life.
Mm-hmm.
They loved me, and I don't know why. And then moving forward from that, we could spend a long time talking about my pre-29-year-old
Mm-hmm.
Rob, and none of it's good. But why would God choose me? What possible reason? I am not special in any way. I talk too much. I'm stubborn, and I just want to know why. Now, the guy that's read the scripture would say because he loves me. But somehow for me, I want to know more.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know why. Why me? Why not everybody else?
Mm-hmm.
Why not somebody else? There's a lot of people out there that are smarter than I am. There's a lot of people out there that are better looking than I am. There's a lot of people out there that didn't do the things that I have done in my life. But God chose to use me. And I would like to know why. So I think his answer is going to be funny. I think he's going to laugh at me
Mm-hmm.
and says, because I love you.
Right.
And
because you listened.
I guess. Maybe it was because I said yes.
Mm-hmm.
But that would be what I would want to know.
Mm-hmm.
But why?
Mm-hmm.
Just why? I know why he saves other people. I just don't know why he saved me.
Well,
really glad that he did.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So,
I am too. You bring a lot of joy and wisdom, and I love your family. So thank you for that.
I love him too.
Well, thank you for coming on the podcast. I'm certainly grateful. And like I said, down the road, we'd love to have you back.
Absolutely.
To the listener, thank you for listening to this kind of clunky version of a podcast tonight. We've had a couple of interruptions, my doing, of course, in technology, but I appreciate everybody listening in and hanging in, and stay tuned next week for another episode of the My Jesus Story podcast.